Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Canadian federal election forecast. So we've had a good series of polls the last couple weeks, and by a good series, I mean we've had more than one pollster, which is pretty good. I don't think we're going to see more than this until after the Conservative leadership race and after the Ontario provincial election is over. So we'll probably see some late June from all the core pollsters that you would expect to release polls. Maybe the end of May, but I suspect we will not see many specifically Canadian until then. With that said, of the Main Street and Nanos polls we're getting, and I can't go too much into the Nanos polls because of subscriber agreements, sadly, but of the two that we are getting, they actually both broadly agree that the Conservatives have had a big bump up. And actually, if we pan over to this, we see here, and this is calibrated to May. This is being released May 10th now, but all of these polls are before May 8th, so I don't really see the need to calibrate it for May 10th because there's no point in calibrating the model too far in the future when your polls are released. Long story short, it causes the model to be weird. So we see here, the Liberals have actually gained a little bit of steam. The Conservatives have gained a lot of steam. They're up about 3.6 percentage points. The NDP are down quite a bit. The Bloc are down a bit. The PPC are down quite a bit. And other and the Greens are down a little. So, broadly speaking, all the tertiary parties got smaller, and the two core parties got a bit bigger. Across Atlantic Canada, largely, the Liberals gained ground, and in Quebec, everywhere else, except Manitoba, the Liberals have lost ground, and pretty much, I think, every single region, the Conservatives have gained ground. The one I am most hesitant about is BC. It'll be easier to see this here. BC, they're currently forecasted at 122 seats. As always, BC is the province you should be the most grain of salt taking when looking at results for it, because the polling for BC is just wild. Every other poll, the NDP, Liberals, and Conservatives are in a different position. Even the same pollster, poll over poll, those three are in a significantly different position. So it's just chaos. So I don't have too much confidence in this result. And if you recall the 2021 Canadian election, a similar thing happened where my model over forecast the Conservatives in BC. That is really just an issue with the model. That is not, I'm not sure if it's fixable. I think it's just endemic because the polling in BC is just wild. I will look into that when we're getting closer to an actual Canadian election. But until then, because the fix to that isn't actually the model side, it is to do with the data entry side, and that's a bit more complicated. I don't really want to explain it because it's off topic, but that all said, there is definitely something going on nationally. The Conservatives have gained a ton of ground. You see here they're up about 9 in Ontario, 9 in BC, 1 in Alberta, and 1 in New Brunswick. The NDP are dropping 7 seats, Greens are dropping 2, and the Bloc are dropping 2. Liberals are actually, the Greens and the NDP are mostly going to the Conservatives in this one. Though I will note, I think the Ontario seat, at least presently, is more likely to go to the Liberals, but that is also an artifact of the model that unless I get local polling, it just can't forecast a situation like that because it is an actual four-party race. I think the Greens are present. Prior to this, the Greens are sitting at like 30% of the vote. So they took a big hit, specifically in Ontario, so then they dropped down. In reality, I suspect some of those Green voters and some of these NDP voters would strategically vote Liberal, and the Conservatives wouldn't win the seat, but my data does not predict strategic voting perfectly. I try to adjust for it, but there's only so much you can do. So Possibly the Liberals should be up to 150 to 140 Conservatives, but generally this ballpark. So there's the big elephant in the room here is why did the Conservatives get such a huge bump here? What has happened in April and May that has caused this to occur? Now you could point to all sorts of things and be like this and that and that and this. For example, you could be like, a liberal budget came out, people don't like the budget. Okay, it's reaction to the liberal NDP coalition. Okay, maybe. The Conservative leadership race is giving the Conservatives good publicity. Yeah, that's a possibility. Like, there's all sorts of things. Maybe people don't like how the Trudeau government's handling the war in Iraq. The war in Ukraine. Well, brain's right there. Another possible is people don't like how the inflation is going or the economy is going, et cetera, et cetera. There's a ton of reasons that could be happening here. But one I am going to stake a lot to is specifically the leadership race. I think the leadership race here is giving the Conservatives a lot of very good publicity, specifically Pierre Poilievre. Now, this is not to say Pierre Poilievre winning or being the leader would necessarily boost the Conservatives. But it is to say that his campaign is boosting Conservatives. And the reason why I feel like I can say this is the demographic the Conservative Party has gained the most in recently is the under 35 demographic. The under 35s at this current point in my model are currently sitting at 36% for the Conservatives. The Liberals and the NDP are at 26 and 25 respectively. So the under 35 demographic is overwhelmingly supporting the Conservatives right now. Overwhelmingly compared to vote share. We go back here. They're about 36.5%. That's almost, we can even look at the exact number here. Under 35s are 36.49%. And for the note, the Conservatives are actually doing the worst among all people right now. 55 plus, and Liberals are doing the best among them. Also interesting note. Now, why am I supposing that the Conservatives suddenly doing strongly better among this demographic is significantly a result of Pierre Poilievre's campaign, specifically him? The reason for this is the under 35 demographic, the late millennials, the early Zoomers, that group of people are the most affected in Canada about housing, cost of living, wages, and, importantly, inflation. This group of people is set presently to be worse off than their parents. The first generation, as far as I'm aware, in recorded history, at very least in Canadian history, that is going to be worse financially than their parents were. On average. Obviously, there's individuals who are going to do better, but on average, they're going to do worse than their parents did. And to this generation, you have three main people speaking to them. There's three main parties in Canada, really. The NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals. The Liberals have governed the last 7 years. The last 7 years in which housing prices have doubled, inflation or wages have stagnated. We have the lowest wage growth in the entirety of the G7 and one of the lowest in OPEC. Specifically, or importantly too, lowest among peer nations in OPEC. And in this, With the 7 years of liberal rule, these things have stayed true. Inflation is going up under liberal rule. And it seems, especially based on comments Justin Trudeau made in the 2021 campaign, he does not care about monetary policy, and the government is continuing to run inflationary deficits that are exacerbating it. Now, fortunately for Canadians, the Trudeau government seems to have more fiscal sense than the Biden administration in the US, who, just as a side note, most economists agree that the last Build Back Better, no, was it? Their trillion-dollar stimulus package added about 3 percentage points to their inflation rate, which is the main reason why ours are different. They decided to spend a bunch of money while the economy was already inflationary. Dumb. But back to Canada. So, if the Liberals are facilitating all of the losses that the late millennials and the Zoomers are facing, all of them. 2015, Canadian purchasing power wasn't far behind the US, and housing prices weren't that unaffordable. I think they were sitting around $350,000 on average, or $400,000 or something. One of those two. I think it was $380,000 actually. Expensive, probably more expensive than they needed to be, but not unreasonable. A regular person could reasonably expect to achieve that. 7 years later, an average person cannot be expected to be able to afford a home in any Canadian city. In rural areas, it's also unlikely because most rural areas just do not have housing stock. It's not a case that the homes are unaffordable, there's just no homes to be bought. Wages stagnated for 7 years, and the Trudeau government seems completely unwilling to even attempt to address them and is instead focusing on importing more immigrants to solve labor shortages, and instead of using those labor shortages or letting the private sector use those labor shortages to innovate, to increase per capita worker productivity, to increase wages. Instead of that, we're getting more workers, i.e. the Trudeau government's solution to stagnant wages is to stagnate wages. The Trudeau government's solution to housing being more expensive is to introduce more programs to allow people to spend more money on houses. In other words, his entire administration, his solutions to the problems that are most affecting the under 35 demographic is to make the problem worse. He is literally making those problems worse on purpose. This is not a conspiracy. It's what he says. He specifically, and also in this regard, Freeland, are specifically and proudly talking about these initiatives. We're going to increase the immigration target. They're proud to say this. They're going to increase. They introduced that new $40,000 saving account that's going to function like an RRSP, so people can save more money to buy their first home. In other words, they're going to allow people to spend more money on their home, i.e. they're going to let people take more debt to buy the home, i.e. they are increasing the cost of homes. They are proud of these things. So they are proud to make the problem worse. So you look at the average under 35 person in Canada. The Liberals, how can you vote for the Liberals? They are proudly saying to you, openly to your face, that they're going to make the problem worse. The two main problems in your life, they are proudly making worse. So they're nothing. You can't vote for them. That's why they're taking huge losses among this demographic. You look at the NDP. What are the NDP doing? Basically the exact same thing as Trudeau. The only exception is the NDP also want to nationalize dental care and pharmacare and all this other cares that you can name. Well, you look at that. What does nationalizing those things actually do? Well, we can't afford to fund our healthcare system presently. We don't have enough money. Every single person agrees with our current system. We do not have enough money being spent on it. So we do not have enough money being spent on our current system, and you plan on taking $30 billion of more expenditure as per the parliamentary budget officer between dental and pharmacare by the time the programs are fully rolled out. Where are you getting the money? Raising taxes. Oops, you made life more unaffordable. Oops, you reduced per capita productivity relative to the rest of the world because you're scaring away business investment because taxes are too high in Canada. Oopsie daisies. Also worth noting for Justin Trudeau, I forgot to mention this, his embracure of carbon tax also is counterproductive to trying to increase per capita worker productivity, because most things that increase per capita productivity in the industries that exist in Canada would increase carbon emissions. So they can't do them. For example, one thing that could increase the average per capita worker productivity is increase oil exports. Oops, we can't do that. Sad. More mining. Oops, we can't do that. Sad. These two things, as many others, basically dead in the water based on carbon tax and other environmental policies. Further making it hard for people, young people, to find high-paying jobs in Canada. Decreasing per capita worker productivity, decreasing wage competitiveness, and decreasing earnings potential. So then you're left with the Conservatives. Now, the Conservatives don't have a leader, so you can't really point to anything. I mean, technically Bergen is the leader, but no reasonable person is going to point to what Bergen's saying and taking that as the Conservative policy line. That is unreasonable, because, frankly, she's mostly just a caretaker right now. What an interim leader is. She's there in case an election's called, but probably not going to be called, because it would be really bad luck to call an election while another party's having a leadership race. So then you look at the candidates for the Conservative leadership race and look at their policy talking points. And of them, Poilievre is the most vocal. He has the most social media shares, the most views on YouTube, for example. He seems to be getting the most people to his rallies. All of these things being the primary methods that young people communicate through. So his main campaign strategy coincidentally targets the under 35 demographic the most, because the under 35 demographic, I can say as a YouTuber, are the main people who watch YouTube videos. I believe 50% of my traffic is under 30 years of age. So most other YouTube channels are going to be similar. Maybe 50 years from now, and I apologize for the cap, but maybe 50 years from now that's going to be different. But for now, this is what it is. So his primary campaign targets these people the most. Now, you're gonna go wait. Poop. Shoot cat. Sorry, guys. Where was I? So his primary campaign targets these people the most. And what is he saying to these people? Well, he wants to build more houses. Stark contrast to the NDP and the Liberals who are not focusing on building more houses. They play lip service to it, but the plans the Liberals have put up and the plans that the NDP have memed about are farcical. They're like 100,000 homes in 10 years was Trudeau's plan of government spending. Yeah, how's that going to really help anything? 100,000 homes across Canada in 10 years? That's literally irrelevant. It's a rounding error. The NDP are talking about building like goodles of homes. I think they're talking about 500,000. It's like, good luck. When has a government project ever actually built things on target? Trudeau, or conversely, Poilievre's plan is he's going to reduce the regulations on construction and increase the turnaround so people can get permits faster to build faster, which would allow construction companies to build more projects, which would actually get the private sector to work more efficiently. That, in concept, should work. Regardless of what the government does, that should, in concept, actually reduce. Or permanently increase housing stock and the capacity to build housing stock. Whereas the Liberal and NDP plans are mostly, will temporarily increase housing stock at great public expense by an inconsequential amount. Oh, well, great. Thanks. Good job. Similarly, Poilievre's focused very hard on things like inflation, cost of living. And these issues, as previously stated, are resonating very hard with younger Canadians. Because these are cost of living and purchasing power are two of the biggest components that is facing younger Canadians. Some of the largest problems to this day. You see people, broadly speaking, on the left talking about how climate change is an emergency, completely ignoring the fact that in reality, very few people are probably going to die from climate change. If you look at the median case models, it's very small, and a lot of those models assume people aren't going to move and just sit there and drown as the lands flood, which is farcical. It also assumes there's no innovation or technological development, or we don't do anything different, which is also dumb. I mean, everyone saw the COVID models from March 2020. Those weren't very good. So that is apparently an emergency, but the average person in Canada who's under 35 being worse, financially speaking, for their entire life than their parents, that's okay. We don't have to worry about that. Poilievre, even among the conservative leadership candidates, is the only one talking to this. Now, I will maybe concede, possibly Aitchison or Baber might be talking about it to a lesser extent. And by lesser extent, I mean they don't have the same publicity or reach that Poilievre does, so they might not be disseminating as well. But Poilievre, of people who have large voice, is dominating this topic, and he's the only one talking about it, and he's actually saying solutions that, in principle, if implemented, should work. Or at least should have a positive effect. Whereas the Liberals, the NDP, are talking about solutions that, in principle, should not actually do anything. A savings account to let people save more money to buy their first home should not make homes more affordable. Maybe it'll be neutral, but in reality it's probably going to increase the price. Building 100,000 homes in 10 years is probably going to do nothing. It's such a small quantity of homes that the reality is it's going to have no impact. And it's such a long period of time it's being spread out over. We are, I believe, the number is like a couple 100,000 deficient right now. And we're building too few homes every single year. So we are already at, let's say, 200,000 deficiency right now. And every single year, we're getting another 30,000 in the hole. Well, building 10,000 more is irrelevant. If it worked out to be 10,000 a year from Trudeau's plan. That's an irrelevant change. What you need to do is you need to make the per year gain permanently match per year demand. Ideally, exceed it, but at the minimum, meet it. And Poilievre is the only one who's made a suggestion for that. And I suspect this is why the Conservatives are currently going up. Now, the trick with this is the under 35 demographic is very fickle. Specifically because they don't vote very frequently relative to their population size. And they're more open to changing their minds. Typically speaking, as you get older, you get more set in your political views and you're less likely to change your mind. Younger people are more likely to change their mind. So it is a very fickle demographic to try to persuade. But in a long-term political sense, it is a perfect demographic to persuade, because if you can get them on board with you through their early years into their 40s and 50s, they're likely going to stay with you for as long as you don't violate the trust you've built from them. So from an abstract political strategy, it's a great demographic to attract. But as the NDP have learned every single year of their existence, that it doesn't always stay that way. Now, the Conservatives do have the advantage that, typically speaking, people get more conservative as they age. It's not strictly true, because as we can see, going back again right here, the Liberals control more 55-plus voters than Conservatives. But, broadly speaking, you do get more conservatives as you age. So, there is something to be said for that. Now, where does that put Canada here? Well, I suspect it's going to the seat total here, and if we go back to here, the vote share is going to flex a lot. There's not a lot of polls right now, so this trend that I'm currently seeing and currently commenting on could be a red herring. As always, with any video based on polling, where I'm looking at issues and I'm looking at polling results and trying to draw correlations between them, it could be a red herring, because there is no guarantee that the polls that have been collected thus far are accurate. Or they tell the whole picture, or the pollster could be biased, or they could be intentionally lying. All these things are possible. But until more data comes out, this looks like it. And this isn't like a one-week trend. This is, in the case of the polls I've seen, we're about 4 weeks now where this same, I'm going to say 5 weeks. 5 weeks in a row now where the Conservatives are completely dominating the under 35s. And it seems too coincidental with the point that Poilievre's campaign has really started. Really picked up around the end of March. And coincidentally, the end of March, this has happened. And it also so happens that the end of March was when Trudeau dropped his budget, which further reinforced that his government actively doesn't care to solve the problems that the youngest people in Canada are facing. So that's where we are in Canada. What to watch out for? Well, the Conservative leadership race is a big one. The winner will decide a lot. I suspect if Charest wins, this entire thing I just talked about will go away. You'll probably see a repeat of 2021 in whatever election, let's say 2025, and then Liberals will probably walk away with another weird small minority, and we'll be back to where we were. If Poilievre wins, it's anyone's game, it looks like. If Lewis or Baber or Aitchison win, or Brown, who knows? That's a whole new ballgame. That is definitely the most important thing to watch nationally right now. With that said, though, we'll wrap this up here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe. Comment below what you thought. If you think I'm off base, if you think I'm correct, if you think I'm missing things. Generally speaking, will miss a few things. I'm a person, so I'm only so good. Love all the comments. If you want to see more random thoughts of mine or be up to date on video schedules, because YouTube does not give me the powers to make discussion threads on YouTube. I'm not cool enough, I guess. Follow me on Twitter at BagelPolling. Link should be in the description. And I will also note to everyone who is looking forward to the next election systems video today, that got pushed back because, well, long personal issues slowed down production of that. That's going to be Thursday. And one final note to everyone. I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but whatever. Tomorrow, or Wednesday, which I guess is tomorrow from the release of this video, at 8 Eastern Time, we are doing another live stream for the next Conservative leadership debate. I meant to mention this on Sunday, but I forgot. So we're mentioning it now. And if you followed me on Twitter, you would have seen it earlier. I posted it this morning. There you go. With that said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow, I suppose.